We're trying to solve a problem here.
Tomorrow's going to be very exciting.
We are so excited about the future.
I will build your roads.
We don't need roads.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Solving for Tomorrow, Tales from the Tech Frontier. I'm your host, Brian Geisel, CEO of Geisel Software, and your friendly neighborhood tech translator. Today we're talking about something a little crazy. What happens when the planet starts throwing curveballs? Floods, fires, landslides, and even your insurance company says, "Good luck out there, buddy. I'm out." That's not sci-fi, it's real life, it's happening right now. Our guest today, Tobias Kraft, knows this all too well. After wildfires nearly wiped out his neighborhood, he realized the tools we use to predict and prepare for disasters are way behind where they need to be. So he founded Teren, a company that's building the real-time geospatial intelligence platform that industries, and maybe even your city, will depend on to survive the next big disaster. Today, we're diving into how data, AI, and a lot of clever thinking are creating new ways to fight back against climate risk, and why the future of protecting homes, cities, and businesses starts way beneath our feet. Stick around. This one is a wild ride. Toby, I'm so glad to have you here. And before we do anything else, you have kind of a personal connection to this, not kind of, a really personal connection to this that led you into this. Could you just talk about that for a second, and how did you get here?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. And it really probably starts with my hobbies. I grew up skiing, mountain biking, camping, hiking, backpacking, and really developed a pretty profound connection with the natural world through those hobbies. And then, of course, came, the late adolescent, early 20s where everybody's, putting pressure on you. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? And, trying to wrestle with that dilemma. And, and at the same time, we're hearing a lot about climate change and, this existential crisis that we have as a species. And I decided to really, focus my efforts on studying natural resources and what they call spatial information systems. So, satellites, imagery, things like that can help us, create a digital representation of the natural world, and then use that to help understand and better manage the systems that we live in. And, without really much thought behind it, besides, this is something I'm passionate about and want a career making a difference, jumped in with both feet. Started working in soft money research at Colorado State University, and then started to get some firsthand insight into some of these big issues that energy companies, oil and gas companies, were having in the state of Colorado as it related to environmental impacts and environmental threats. That's when I decided to kind of try my hand at starting my own business, and started out as an environmental consultant, flying drones and helping energy companies understand, energy or environmental compliance issues and reporting and things of that sort. And that has, since evolved into where we're at today with building an AI-based technology that allows us to, at a more global scale, understand, where and when threats, environmental threats and changes are happening on the earth, and being able to predict that in real time at a hyper-localized level to help, infrastructure owners or land managers make really pointed decisions about where they can, both address these threats and fortify their assets to prevent future disasters.
And am I right that you actually had a wildfire very near your house and had that to deal with at some point?
Yeah, so we've been we live in the Front Range here in Colorado in the foothills, and and there's been a couple of years now where it feels like there's wildfires popping up all around us, and we're just moments away from evacuation. And kind of the combination of that threat, not wanting to lose our home, and then of course having a kind of deep understanding of the types of data that's available, really helped inspire me to work toward building technologies that would allow us to be more proactive about how we can reduce those threats, reduce that risk, at the property level, and that really set the stage for Teren and what we're building today.
Wow, what a powerful kind of origin story and relation to actually having to deal with that. That's crazy. Here's our rapid fire. Quick, short. What's one piece of technology you selfishly could not live without?
Yeah, so I think for myself, and maybe this is becoming true for most people, but LLMs like ChatGPT have become probably like the most powerful tool that I have in the quiver right now from a day-to-day basis. So it went from, kind of this thing that you talked about as a cocktail party or a few people were talking about a couple of years ago to now it's like, it's not just what I'm using every day at work to help with, legal contracts, day-to-day business tasks, developing coding, things of that sort, but I'm using it on the weekends. I'm using it to understand what's going on with my health. To work on projects around the house. It's just, yeah, I think if that was taken away at this point, I'd be back to my, caveman ways of using Google search.
Are you using any of the agentic stuff with it yet?
I'm not. I guess I don't know agentics.
So, and this is, I don't know who decided this, but all it is of or relating to an agent. And we just found a fancy word for it.
Okay,
And
gotcha.
so, like, if you're replacing like a virtual assistant kind of a task where you give the LLM access to interface to something. So if you give it access to your email, let's say, and give it access to, I don't know, your Google Drive, and you give it access to your, I don't know, let's say your candidate database for who you hire, then you could have the LLM like pull stuff from your email and go, oh, this person just emailed you out of the blue and said, I'd like to apply at your company. Let me just put them into your applicant tracking system for you.
I think I'm maybe not as sophisticated in having all of my systems wired up. I've used chat. We have the enterprise level chat subscription, and then from there I've trained it on my local workspace. And every board deck that I've created, every investor presentation, and it's just phenomenal. I mean, things that used to take me days to create, I can do in minutes now, because it has all of that intrinsic knowledge from what was the last thing we said to the board, and it's made my life a lot easier.
I love it, especially like the customization thing, like give it all your data about what it is you might want to say, and then now say it to this kind of an investor or this group of people or whatever, right?
Yeah. Those easy prompts. Give me this. This is a board report. I need to have an executive summary in place for this audience, and yeah, it's just. Although I am finding that like you can, like I selfishly, I'm like, what, I do need to put myself back into the AI a little bit, right? Initially, it was just half the things it was doing I felt like were far superior than anything I've ever done. So, you could kind of take and bake, but now I'm like, what, this needs a more personal tone. I almost need to make this a little bit rougher around the edges just so it embodies a little bit more of that, of the human characteristic.
Yeah. And I think we've gotten used to LLM tone now also. And so there's a little bit of that, like, oh, let me say this in a way that's not the perfect prose, but will sound more like me.
Yep, exactly. So, no, man, that's really it. I mean, it's incredible to think about, just the step function that we're going through right now as humanity. When it comes to these technologies, and we're really in the early innings.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, what's one thing you wish we didn't have?
Yeah, this was kind of a tough one, but I would say like engagement based algorithms right now are something that I wish we didn't have, and I think that's
What do you
largely.
mean by that?
So that's like, when you're on social media and the algorithms do such a good job figuring out like what your interests are, what you're pausing on while you're doom scrolling. And then you start to see more of that content. And while I love the kind of steady stream of dopamine hits I can get when I'm, looking at, different, ski and sports and shopping and all the other things that I'm into, I think that when it comes to kind of the political state and where we sit right now as a much on a much broader sense of society, I think that it's kind of created these information silos and echo chambers that unless you kind of know what's happening with these algorithms, right, and that you know that you have these biases, and then that's kind of creating more content that's reinforcing that bias, then you're just going to travel down the rabbit hole. And, whether it's a conspiracy theory or anything else, it just plays off those parts of our psyches, I think, in really unhealthy ways that, perhaps not to be sort of age bias, but I think a lot of older generations maybe struggle with understanding what's kind of happening under the hood and are much more subject to being kind of misled or, really just living in that echo chamber non-objectively.
Toby, what are you talking about? The whole internet agrees with me. You
Right,
must be
exactly.
crazy.
You haven't seen this? Like, yeah.
It's true. And I think you're right about the age differences in just how we grew up. Like there is a certain age at which you could trust traditional media. The good media was unbiased and they gave you information pretty directly.
Yeah.
And now all information is biased, kind of no matter what source it's coming from. And if you believe it's not biased, you can fall into this trap of like, oh, no, this one's good. And really, you're only getting, like you said, that echo chamber. What's a future innovation that you're excited about? Future robotics or AI predicting weather better or whatever?
Yeah, so this is kind of all new for me, I would say, and that the space race and kind of specifically what's happening around the moon and the interest in the moon right now has really kind of piqued my interest lately. And just part of this startup accelerator that we're in, we got to do a private tour of Lockheed Martin's space facility here in Denver.
Cool.
And just all kinds of capital flowing into the space race right now. And of course, Bezos has his thing, Musk has his thing. They're all kind of building out all this infrastructure to have a lunar base. And I'm like, so I get it. Like we want to explore, the far reaches of the universe and understand the origins of man and perhaps find other places we can colonize. But I'm like, there's got to be some other economic driver here. Like, what is all the focus on the moon? And after doing more research, really started to learn more about helium-3. And what the potential economic value that isotope could have when it comes to like fusion energy, and that being sort of a big push to get to and develop out the moon with different types of robotic mining and using spaceship as the cargo hauler to bring that back to Earth. And it's really kind of next level. But listening to these guys talk and listening to folks from some of these big energy companies, they're really trying to get ahead of like what it's going to take to feed AI. Because AI is now forecasted to far supersede the energy demands of, what human beings are putting on the grid. And, we're quickly running into that nexus of like, we need some kind of an alternative, super powerful energy source that can keep up with that rise in demand.
The fusion stuff is fascinating. That's awesome. I like it. The energy, I guess, in general is really interesting. Okay. Last one, VR headset that can take you anywhere, or you really can go anywhere. Anytime. When do you go? Where do you go?
My thinking was, going back to the Paleolithic era to see how humans lived in this kind of unfiltered connection with nature, and just kind of getting a sense for what the kind of native, like untouched, Earth, would have looked like at some time. And I think that while that's really still interesting to me, if I really could choose when and where, the future, I guess, I'd love to kind of go forward in time 50 years and see, how well have we tackled the climate crisis? How have things evolved in this kind of post AI world? I'm kind of constantly asking myself, like, what is the future going to bring? When we see this technology, and we just talked about LLMs, but this is just the beginning, and we're going to be displacing a lot of white collar jobs, and it's going to have major impacts on the world and the economy and in the labor market as we've known it, and just to kind of see how we adapt. I believe we will adapt. I'm typically positive when it comes to these kinds of things, and I'm just, would love to see what that future state looks like.
And I think that's a really great segue for us in that Teren is doing some really interesting stuff in the environmental space. Can you give us just like the 30-second, what are you guys doing and what's interesting about it? And then let's jump into it.
Yeah, so Teren is really our core focus is on an environmental twin platform. And so if you're familiar with the digital twin, it's basically how can we create a digital replication of the physical world, so that we can better manage, big mechanistic systems, whether that's a utility trying to get an understanding of, poles and wires and infrastructure and everything that they have out there and the kind of interplay and movement of electrons in those systems. If it's a big manufacturing facility that wants to understand and be able to model all the different components of, the manufacturing process. Those were, sort of these aspirational ideas 10 years ago that have now really rooted in a lot of these industrial industries. And what our focus is really on the environmental piece. Like, how can we create a digital environmental twin that allows us to understand and manipulate the environment in a digital space so we can better understand how things are going to react in the real world?
Okay, super interesting. And I want to ask you about some more of the environmental stuff in a minute. But from that standpoint, does that mean are you like modeling the evaporation of water molecules over the ocean and then how fast that's going to form a hurricane? And can you tell me if there's going to be a hurricane on July 27th in Florida? What's that mean? What's that turn into?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so I should maybe be a little bit more specific when I describe that. But we're really focused more on the best land-based model. So, there's all these different respective domains. And so as you mentioned, like atmosphere is like probably one of the places where they've made the most progress so far toward kind of an environmental twin. And you're seeing companies now like NVIDIA, Google, IBM, all coming out with AI informed weather forecasting models that, just as you mentioned, Brian, like they can predict, maybe not months in advance, but the 3 to 5 day forecast is now a 10 to 14 day forecast. They're able to get that same type of accuracy. And so, very similar themes in what we're talking about, but what we're really focused on is what are the outcomes, right? So if we can be that much better and that much more accurate at predicting the weather and climate and how that's going to be changing in any given time, how is the environment going to respond? And then what impact is that going to have on human life, assets, and critical infrastructure?
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So, boy, and that's so true. Like when we think about, I think we have some natural bias around these things because we talk about how bad the weather report is. And I sometimes think, do people not remember what the weather reports were like 30 years ago? Like tomorrow was a 50-50 chance. And now I'm asking my watch so I know what it's going to do on Thursday.
Yeah. Yeah. We're brats, right? Like nothing is ever good enough. I don't know if you've ever heard the Louis C.K. bit on that, but everything's amazing and nobody's happy, but it plays off that perfectly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We stabilize pretty quick to how today is working. Yeah, that's so true. So, okay, so that's really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about like what are some of the things that are different from the digital twin where people are regularly doing digital twins inside like a manufacturing plant or something? We might go in and build out all the things in 3D space and map how they interact, map some of the software, all these kinds of things so we can kind of simulate them and run through these in what we would call a digital twin. It sounds like this is kind of next level digital twin where it's like digital earth twin. So what are some of the things that you run into that you have to deal with that way versus like when I get to do it inside of a building and you're doing it with land-based things? How does that work? What's that look like?
When you think about kind of an industrial facility, these are sort of like controlled labs, right? And everything in it is kind of human made, human engineered. And so we have a really good understanding, and things tend to be a bit more predictive in that situation. Whereas the environment, is largely seen as stochastic, right? Something that's very difficult to predict. And, and I think in that same breath, what the digital twins really do well with is big, really complex systems that have all these different, covariates or codependencies on, something happens over here. How does that impact something, 3 steps down the line? And that's very much, how the environment works. And I would say probably one of the biggest challenges is that it's big data, right? I mean, you're dealing with, a lot of Earth observation data, flooding in from satellites at really high resolution, different land models like what we have, that operate at a really high resolution. And so, computationally, you're needing to kind of iterate, through a lot of those different data sets to then, come up with the, an accurate result. And then the abundance of verification data, right? Like how much training data do we have out there to say, okay, based on, this amount of rainfall, we can expect to see, landslides in, this many different geographies. There isn't really an abundance of that kind of training data out there to really help validate some of the model outputs and things of that sort. So, there's an absence of training data, I would say, and then it's big, really computationally, really complex variables that you're trying to mash together.
Yeah, right. And so if you guys can model things like landslides, that explains an awful lot about why you're in Colorado, huh?
That's right. Yeah. So was a passionate skier, grew up in New York, moved out to Colorado to, pursue the dream, right? Living in the Rocky Mountains where there's abundant snowfall, things like that. What avalanches really, like that's our big thing. That's so critical.
Oh,
So that
interesting.
that
Okay.
really sort of piqued my interest sort of from a hobbyist perspective around, understanding landforms and the physics of snowpack and how that drives avalanche activity. And then, from a professional perspective, really have started to see where, there's abundant pain in a lot of major infrastructure industries around land movement, which has very similar properties to avalanches, and then really starting to hone in a focus on, how we could help companies understand and become, more proactive about those kinds of threats.
It's funny because I have a friend who's actually here in our area in central Massachusetts today who is doing surveys for these to analyze where are they likely to have these kinds of issues and how's the current structure, and in fact texted me a few months ago to say, hey, when does Massachusetts get overgrown and when do I not have to stomp through the snow to look at these things?
That's good information. So I'm sure at a kind of in a separate venue, we could probably quickly figure out that we have a mutual connection there. But yeah, that's the field work is very critical to what we do, and so we work really closely with a lot of environmental services companies, folks that really provide that kind of boots on the ground observation, because that's really where otherwise we're kind of hovering above the ground, untethered in this kind of modeling ether, if you will, doing the best we can to try to, predict where we think things are going to occur. But there's really no substitute to an observation in the field and something that can really tether and help train our algorithms.
Okay, so I was kind of imagining that you guys just get data from a magic satellite or something. So where are you guys getting the data from? Some of it sounds like from boots on the ground.
Yep, satellite, airborne. A lot of it is airborne lidar. That's kind of the best tool for creating a terrain surface.
And can you tell people what LiDAR is for those that are
Yep.
kind of new to that?
Yeah, so lidar is a laser-based technology. That if you could imagine a laser beam that's flying in an aircraft, shooting about 20 points per square meter at the Earth's surface. So that's a really high density, a lot of laser points hitting the ground, and what that allows you to do is, a lot of those laser beams, as you can imagine, are going to bounce off the tops of houses in tree canopies and things like that. But also some of them are going to get through, right? They're going to get through that vegetation and through that canopy. And then from there, you can actually peel back the vegetation and really reveal what that kind of bare earth surface looks like, which is really important, when it comes to, not only identifying, where landslides might already exist or ancient landforms that are sliding, things of that sort, but also to produce, high resolution models that help kind of pick up on those terrain features and subtleties that drive a lot of that land movement. Most folks have, probably seen the National Geographic special about ancient Mayan ruins being found in the Amazon jungle and
I was going to
things like
ask about
that. And
that.
yeah, that's the technology we're talking about.
Okay, perfect. So satellite, aerial LiDAR, anything else you guys are using for that, building that data?
Yeah, so fortunately here in the U.S., the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service has created a comprehensive database of soils. So we have a really pretty high resolution 3-dimensional soils map for just about anywhere in the United States that helps you understand how the soil profile developed, how it changes, depth to bedrock, what all those properties are, which gets at like soil porosity, how fast is water going to move through the soil, where's water going to slow down and build up in the soil profile, and what's the cohesion of particles, how likely are they to break apart and slide away. So a lot of that soil physics, soil chemistry, all of that is something that we're really lucky to have here in the United States, and it plays a really big role in this environmental twin that we've generated. And then, of course, the USGS as well has a pretty extensive database of bedrock and parent material and, things like that besides soil. And so, yeah, we bring in a lot of different publicly available authoritative models on soil, vegetation, rock outcrop, things of that sort.
Okay, right. And does that stuff play into, like, you hear these things about what's going on with insurance companies just dropping insurance for certain states? I mean, how much of that is regulation and how much of that is like, we don't know what the heck the ground is doing anymore, we're out?
Yeah, I mean, you're hearing a lot of that, right? Like the 100-year storm is now like the 5-year storm,
Right.
and so a lot of these different parametric models and NatCat models that the insurance industry is kind of largely lived on are they're based on historical data sets, and so when we're seeing kind of extreme anomalies and weather and climate, it suddenly gets really hard to kind of hang your hat on some of those historic models. I would say it's, somewhat the combination of that. And then the other piece of it is, it's more political. It's that, even to update some of these or as insurance companies are getting better information, they want to adjust rates. And, it's the state's job to make sure that, consumers are protected from, rate hikes and things like that. And so insurers have been their hands have been tied in terms of saying, okay, we know the risk has changed here in California. We need to adjust rates in order to kind of reflect that risk. And then, struggling to get that done and stack a bunch of losses and claims on top of that. And suddenly it's like, it's not worth it for us to do business here in these geographies anymore.
Right. Does any of the work that you guys do help with that? Because I wonder is it just that the cost is so high because the storms are occurring, or how much of that is like, we don't know and you helping them know? Does that help that at all?
Yeah, so I think it's a loaded question without a very simple answer. But I would say if I had a magic wand, let's take wildfire, for instance. I live in a wildfire prone area. We just renewed and we had one option that we could choose from for wildfire. And it really, this was a company that I think has gone a little bit further in looking at, okay, how can we send an inspector out, get a better understanding of what the actual wildfire risk is around this property, rather than relying on kind of a more granular that says, hey, you live in the Front Range of Colorado, it's a forested area with, steep slopes, like this is high wildfire risk. They're coming out and doing kind of a property level detailed assessment to say, okay, if you were able to cut down these trees and remove this amount of vegetation on your property, and things like that, then we will underwrite this home. And I think that's really where we're headed here, is this idea of, well, one, technologies like ours could remove the person from ever needing to go visit that property. We can tell you most of that information either from orbit or from some sort of airborne data set. But the next piece of that is the actionable part, right? It's the resilience piece. It's that, hey, just because something is high risk today doesn't mean that we can't engineer it or modify it and fortify it in a way that does make it more resilient to when that next wildfire comes in. And we don't really have a good, historical trend of that, of that information, so that the data is not there to support it yet, which makes it harder. It's like a chicken or the egg type thing, right? Like, how does the insurer kind of change practices around this when they don't really have any confidence to say, okay, well, this guy cut all his trees down and kept the vegetation mode. So if, as long as other people do that, then we'll underwrite them. So we're in this weird influx period. But I think if we can marry kind of historical risk models, enhance them with more of a higher resolution, more real time type of analyses with technologies like ours, but then close the loop by actually going out there and performing the work that's going to make that asset more resilient, then we can start to see a change in that kind of insurance climate right now. No pun intended.
Yeah. And that's really interesting from the standpoint of, I think we could be talking about this and people could think, okay, well, this affects like insurance companies, and this affects like the Colorado Highway Department or whoever cares about whether a landslide takes out a highway. These are the kinds of things that are happening right now that are affecting tons of people. And if you look at what's happening in California, where they've had so many wildfires start because they had crap that fell on the electrical lines, and then it set fire. They had a storm come through, or even it was just super windy, and it knocked trees over. They landed on the power lines, sets it on fire, and now everything sparks, to the point that they go, it's a little windy today. Let's shut off all power to California. When people told me that, I'm like, no, that can't be what we're doing. We cannot be in a world where we just shut off electricity because it's windy. But we've really gotten there in California at this point, right?
Yeah. And that's like the extreme overreaction, right? And so there's like, this kind of reactive approach to like, so the way that a lot of this used to be handled was force majeure, right? Like, tree falls under power line, sparks a fire. That's like an act of God, right? And that's how a lot of these insurance contracts and things like that were historically written. And so there wasn't really even a traceable liability, right?
I feel like God gets a bad rap in a lot of that. That I don't think that's fair to God.
Yeah. Well, now with like all these new technologies and everything, now you can manage those threats, right? We have the information available to us. The data exists so that like we can have a proactive veg management strategy that goes out and trims those trees back and finds out where the high risk areas are. And of course, if you're a consumer in the Bay Area and your power keeps getting cut out and you have a choice between, losing power for extended periods of time or paying a little bit more in your utility bill to support the data, the analysis, and all the infrastructure hardening that needs to happen, I think that's a pretty easy equation. And yet we end up in this kind of standoff.
Yeah. It's amazing to me how much that's changed from big things I don't care about to stuff I care about a lot. Do you think that's climate change? Do you think that's a temporary thing we're experiencing? Do you think it's something else entirely? Did we just start paying more attention? I don't know. What's going on?
It's a combination, right? I mean, if you think about like, let's just take, California and the Western states, for example. We've seen a tremendous amount of growth in the kind of human environment into what they call the wildland urban interface. So these are, historically wildland areas that do have a burn regime to them. They're supposed to burn. That's what keeps the soils healthy. That's what keeps, kind of different types of vegetation and plants growing. They each kind of have their shot, right? Like that they emerge after the fire, and then they might be the late successional species, like the pine trees that we love so much. And so we've seen a combination of people moving into these environments, but then we've also kind of inappropriately managed them, I think, for the past 100 years. When we first started, I think there was a major wildfire it was either Montana or Idaho, that triggered, and I'll butcher this, but the president at the time said, look, I'm going to give a mandate, to, I think it was the Department of the Interior at that time, that any fire that starts will be extinguished within like 24 to 48 hours of it being observed. And that type of fire suppression approach really kind of created a pretty unhealthy ecological system. And that so through suppression, we basically allowed all of the trees to become their most mature, most vulnerable state, which has also made them, more vulnerable to pests, to beetles, things like that, which create huge die-off, which then create sort of the perfect conditions for huge fires. So there's really kind of a stacking of things that have happened, everything from kind of human involvement in management of those systems to us building infrastructure in those systems. And then you layer in climate change on top of it, and you start getting these kind of more extreme droughts and, more anomalous, precipitation events and things of that sort. And it's kind of the perfect recipe to start seeing like the rampant, catastrophic losses and disasters that we have. So I think it all kind of has its roots, and it's the problem that we have, and it's one of the bigger problems for us to address here in the coming years. But I don't see it going away on its own. Like we've got to get smarter about the science, working with nature, not against it, and making sure that we're smart about where and why we're building infrastructure the way we are.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I find myself thinking a lot of times, like, listen, it's a big planet. Like, could we really be affecting the things that are happening at this level? And for me, I think about things like the Dust Bowl in the U.S., right? Like, as settlers moved west, there were all these grasses on the Great Plains, and they started digging them up to plant wheat or whatever. It turns out the grasses were keeping the dirt in place, and that actually it was like affecting the climate in ways I don't know that I claim to understand. But what was happening is all of a sudden you were getting this like dryness that wasn't there before, and there's no more like huge swaths of grass get turned into wheat or corn or other things we were planting, which seemed fine. We're going to eat it. But we didn't realize that grass was playing such an important role. And all of a sudden they started having these dust storms, and they were totally created by people. And we started putting some of the grass back, and we fixed it. So it really is amazing the effect that we as humans can have on the environment, good or bad, and actually change things. And so that's really interesting that, how much you guys are testing it and looking at these things to where there are actual real things we can do to change them.
Yeah, and you said that well. As a human being on the face of the earth, we're so small and so insignificant in this kind of vast landscape. And so I just think like evolutionarily, like why would we have ever had any sort of incentive to start thinking about like the consequence of something we do and the impact that has on this much larger support system that we depend on? It really takes humans in numbers before you start to kind of bump up against that carrying capacity, right? Where like, we've seen it in fisheries, the Dust Bowl, things like that, where it's like, okay, actually we can deplete, in to a great extent, these resources in which we depend on. And I still think it's so hard for us to wrap our heads around. And I myself struggle with it sometimes, right? It's like in a perfect world, I'd love to have a minimal input and know that none of my activities really have an impact on the greater planet. But at this point, I'm like, you know what? I also need to live a life, and I want to enjoy my time here and not feel this like immense guilt for the activities that I do engage in. So, let's do the best we can and apply our efforts toward kind of innovating and using technologies that help us, be better stewards of the globe and make this a, long-term, habitable place for us as a species.
Yeah. Have you guys seen in the stuff that you're doing things like that? Like, it looks like we're doing this and we could fix this.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing seeing, let's just take utility scale solar development, for instance. This has been a big push, with data centers, electrification, transition from hydrocarbons, et cetera. There's just been a huge explosion of growth and utility scale solar development. And almost similar to the Dust Bowl, right? You're going in there, you're opening up 3 to 5,000 acres of land, and you're removing a lot of critical vegetation and grass and things like that that really help support the soils and things of that sort. And so what we're seeing is, a lot of these sites are, you get a big rainfall event and it'll wash out like the whole solar farm, because you get what they call like sheet flow and overland flow. So like as hydrology starts to accumulate, it starts to gain in velocity and power, and that starts to move tremendous amounts of soil. Whereas before, you're getting infiltration with the plants and the vegetation's helping hold the soil together, and it's all playing an important role. And so we've seen a big shift, in the renewable industry, and being thinking more about where they're building these sites, how they work kind of more with the landscape, and then how they can better model where these kinds of big washout events could happen, now or even into the future. It's becoming kind of a big part of getting project financing and insurance and everything else. So yeah, it's we absolutely see it every day where something might have existed in kind of a steady state, but we came in there with the excavator and the shovel, and now we've kind of accelerated a natural process that maybe would have taken a millennia to happen, but now it can happen in a couple of rainstorms.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting if you think about when we first started burning oil and gas and coal and all this stuff, we weren't burning enough of it. It didn't really matter. We were like, look, energy. I can do stuff. I stay warm. I can see at night. And all that was really, really good. And now we've got like, oh, hey, some stuff is happening from this. So it's interesting that a couple of things you said already are just kind of lighting up in my brain, right? Is like when you were talking earlier about we mandated anytime there's a wildfire within 24 to 48 hours, put it out. And I'm like, whoa, thought we were doing that already. I'm glad somebody finally came up with that. And then you're like, and then that's what made the big wildfires. Like, shoot, dang it, wrong answer. And same thing about solar farms. Like, okay, great. Now we're getting rid of all this oil and coal and gas, or as much of it, right? We can push more of that energy generation on solar. I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. And then, never thought about recreating actually Dust Bowl conditions, getting rid of the grasses and all. We did this once already. We did it for food last time. Now we're doing it for energy.
Yep. Yeah, it's like there's a cost to everything, and I think that's where the environment, like as you mentioned, right? Like could you imagine like trying to convince somebody when they first discovered oil and gas and coal as a source of fuel? I mean, you're like, that's yeah, we can't burn enough of it, right? I mean, this is amazing. It just made our lives 10 times better, survival, everything else. So to kind of go from that to now having to kind of take that a step further and think about the consequence of what that was, right? It kind of felt like everything here on Earth was put for us and for us to consume, and it was ours for the kind of betterment of humanity and everything else. And now it's like, well, there's devastating consequences to that and real financial losses, that happen as a result of it. So now we really need to start thinking about, kind of closing the loop on that system, right? Like, what is our impact? I think we can still have a lot of these things. We can still live these great, amazing lifestyles with new technology and trucks and all the things that we want. But, we just need to sort of build into the calculus of that, what it takes to, minimize those impacts and, what they call the circular economy, but come up with a way in which that kind of becomes more reflected, in our economic structure, and, doesn't necessarily fall on the shoulders of the insurers and reinsurers. And then, perhaps maybe they come back to the table in a better way too.
And I think I get annoyed with, as the whole internet seems to, we get annoyed with people who just jump off to one thing or the other. And I think the reality, I love this conversation is like, I feel like we're getting into some of the data of, nope, it's not good on that side. It's not good on that. There's a Goldilocks in between. Like, yes, solar farms are good. No, there's a problem when we build them too big and we take out too much of the natural vegetation, and and there's probably a solution in there somewhere as to we go, okay, well, it turns out if we build them like this and we put, I don't know, gaps in them or something to let vegetation in the right places, then we come up with a really healthy way to do these things. I think about for the insurer's dilemma is it's really easy to feel like just blame the insurers, but we ran into a thing here in Boston where the powers that be in Boston saved us from the evil Uber surcharges. So during COVID, they said Uber and Lyft cannot surcharge people. That's terrible. How dare you surcharge people? So I get to the airport with 200 other people, it turned out, and none of us can get home because the Uber driver's like, it's a little snowy. I am not taking you 40 miles for $30. And we're all standing at the airport going, I wouldn't like it, but I would pay $400 to not walk home right now because that's my only alternative. And it wasn't a big evil corporation. It was people like you and me who were like, nope, I'm not driving my car out there for $60 or $20 or whatever the normal rates were because they weren't allowed to surcharge. And now all of a sudden we can't go anywhere. And so there is this place where if you make the regulatory environment too restrictive, then companies there's nothing forcing the companies to be part of that environment. So they just disappear. So where can we find the balance in those things that works in a place that we can make it safer for people to live there, able for people to afford it there with the insurance, all those kinds of things, and really have those things all work together?
Yeah, no, it is. I think overly prescriptive regulations, I think, have shown kind of time and time again that they have kind of the net effect of really just choking out industry versus working with it, right? And then what happens, right? Then companies move overseas, and we push those activities to areas of the globe that are less regulated, right? And you see this in energy and commodities, where you know, I remember just recently Canada like shut in the Alberta oil and gas, right? There was like you couldn't get a pipeline permitted to get takeaway from Alberta, right? And it was coming from kind of the taxpayers and the people in Canada electing Trudeau and saying, look, like we don't want to continue to rape and pillage the earth and cause climate change and everything else. We want to move toward more transitional technologies and renewables and things of that sort. But what happened was like, you can't do that with a flip of a switch, right? Like there's a process and that needs to happen in a long time with investments and infrastructure and things like that to get there. But it's kind of politically a way to satisfy the constituents. They said, yep, like we're not going to permit these pipelines. So, but their demand for oil and gas didn't change. So now you start importing from Venezuela and some of these other, and Saudi and these other countries that have no regulations, where Canada actually has a lot of different environmental protections and regulations around how they kind of responsibly extract hydrocarbons from the earth and things like that. So that whole kind of NIMBY, type thing sort of fits into that same mold, where it's like, if we get too aggressive, right, and we for the sake of doing good by the environment, we can kind of cut off our nose to spite our face too.
Right. Yeah, that's, and the whole world has to play in this, it turns out, because if just a few of us clean things up and then the rest are like, oh, well, then that means we should dump double because we need to supply the oil and gas to the few that are limiting it, or like you said, you used a phrase about overly prescriptive regulation. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what about across the world? Are you guys able to, are you guys just focused on like US or North American markets, or do you guys go everywhere, and can you guys get the same level of data everywhere?
So we are expanding. What Southern Europe is kind of plagued with a lot of the same types of things that we see here with, land movement, wildfires, things of
Okay.
that sort. So we're working with a couple of big infrastructure customers in Southern Europe right now. That's really kind of our first foray into an international market. And but as you mentioned, it does it is a big difference in the data that's available. And so a lot of what we do can be agnostic to where it is and in which country and political boundaries. But things like I mentioned with the soils database that we have from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, like we are data rich in the United States, as you would imagine. So some of that's a little bit harder to piece together in these other countries, but even with kind of an off-the-shelf type solution that maybe doesn't have all of the sophistication that we can build into our platform here in the U.S., we can still provide a lot of value with just kind of that Earth observation and terrain-based modeling.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Like, the satellites fly over the whole planet. Do you get the same satellite level detail for the whole planet, but not as much LiDAR? How does that break down?
Exactly. Yeah. So LiDAR is it's a little more sparse, but there are still, like, you can get a terrain data set anywhere on the globe right now. You can
Okay.
you can get some kind of topography. And that can be collected from satellites at kind of lower resolution. You're not going to get the fidelity that you would get out of like an airborne LiDAR survey, where here we have a publicly sponsored USGS nationwide terrain program that gets us 1 meter resolution nationwide, which is phenomenal. And it's a patchwork kind of elsewhere once you expand beyond that. But you could get at least 100 meter just about anywhere on the globe.
Okay. Okay. Got it. So does that, we're going to pause the video for a second. Does that mean you can get me access to some Mayan ruins that nobody else knows about?
Yep. Nope. That necessitates a LiDAR flight. So.
All right. Have you, let me know though, if anything comes up, let me know.
Could be coming. I mean, well, there's a couple of different really cool startups out there right now that are looking to do LiDAR from orbit and get global coverage and things like that. So the space race is real. This is maybe one of the only areas yet where getting kind of that physical structure and terrain at the detail that we typically work in is still dependent on an aircraft flying a sensor.
Okay. That's really interesting. So let me flip, and kind of one of the things we like to do in this podcast is like, what does the future look like from the lens of the interesting stuff that you're doing? And so the space that you play in is really interesting. And I think we've talked about some interesting ways where it affects me, not just governments or right. It does governments and insurance agencies and those things it does, but it affects me too. What does that look like? Or how do you see the future from the lens of the kinds of stuff that you're seeing today? You have a unique perspective from this that I'm interested in.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's changing so fast, Brian, as you can imagine, right? Like I kind of came out of my academic background was heavily based in really mechanistic modeling and sort of that using kind of the first principles of physics and trying to understand how's water going to flow over terrain and and those types of things. And now with AI, much like we've seen with atmospheric sciences and traditional physics-based forecasting systems, AI is outperforming these physics-based models. Now you can't really understand why, right? Like it's hard to really kind of unpack and have that level of traceability that you can have in a traditional physics-based model. But the results speak for themselves. And so I think that where we're headed and a lot of the technologies that we're experimenting with right now are kind of looking at a blend of the two, right? How can we leverage, the first principles of physics in addition to neural nets and some of these other really powerful AI tools to better help kind of predict how these interactions are going to happen on the Earth's surface. And so I think where that's going to impact folks like us is, you're not only going to know, what the weather forecast looks like with great resolution and great confidence, but you're going to know when that big rainstorm hits, where's the road going to wash out, where's the next area that's going to flood, and you're going to understand that kind of in real time, where those things are, where those threats are going to activate on the landscape, where wildfires are going to pop up, things like that are all going to become a lot more predictive and real time in terms of our ability to predict where and when they're gonna happen and who they're gonna happen to.
Yeah. And are those things so big and so just the earth is a big place that the road is going to wash out? Or can I like go dig a trench because I know it's coming and get the water to go a different way and keep our road where it goes?
Yeah, so a combination of both, right? I think it's like we're gonna be able to look forward and say, I mean, it's a big part of what we do now is we look forward and say, okay, based on these different types of events and scenarios, if you have X amount of budget, right, or time to go out and dig a trench, here, Brian, here's the best place to go do that, right? Your house is high risk to flood, but if you do X, Y, and Z, you can reduce that risk by X%, and you're good for the next 1,000-year storm that moves in. Same type of thing with wildfire. So, it's really going to be pretty exciting to see, how these things come together. And like you said, like it's just going to help us work better with nature versus, be kind of surprised at the result.
Yeah. Okay. So in Guatemala, speaking of the Mayan temples, there's this beautiful town in Guatemala called Antigua, Guatemala. And it's this beautiful little town. It used to be the capital of Guatemala. So here's how this worked. It was the capital of Guatemala. It is between, I think, 3, maybe 4 active volcanoes. It was the capital. It done got blowed up because the volcano exploded, blew the town away, and they went, this is not a good idea. So they built a new town. It's called Guatemala City, and that's now the capital of Guatemala. They hung out there for a while, and at some point, somebody went, hey, that place up there looks really nice. How come we don't have a city up there? So they moved back in, and now they called it Antigua. And it's the cutest town. It's the most beautiful town. It's really well known for Spanish immersion. So if you want to go learn Spanish, it's an amazing spot. But you're there looking up going, yep, that's 3 volcanoes that I'm pretty sure I could hit with a well-thrown rock. We're hiking up one of them, and our guide says, este volcán es un volcán inactivo. It's an inactive volcano. And the guy behind me goes, yeah, since last May. That's maybe not so inactive. So if we build our houses in the middle of 3 volcanoes, there might be nothing that we can do about that. And yet there are other things in which we really could learn to model better, have better ideas about it, sounds like, and actually do some things where we could prevent some of those disasters and really make that place more habitable.
Exactly. I mean, it's interesting even just here, so you live in Massachusetts, right? Like how many
Right.
times a week do you mow your lawn in the
None.
middle of the summer?
Once every 2 weeks.
Once every 2 weeks, right? So, I grew up in upstate New York, similar type of thing, right? And when it's really wet in the springtime, sometimes it's once or even twice a week. And that's because if you don't, like your property is going to be overcome with vegetation and you're going to be condemned by your HOA and everything else, right? And when I think about like where we live up in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, a lot of this pressure from wildfire and the insurers to go out and like thin fuels, like no one cuts their grass up in the mountains where I live, right? We're semi-arid, so we don't get that much precipitation. And everybody kind of loves the wildflowers and everything else that comes up with a lot of these native grasses. So it's really kind of unmanaged and unmanicured, right? And the same type of thing with the trees and the shrubs and everything else. It's kind of like we love the wildlife. We love to live in that kind of wildland camping like atmosphere. But in reality, for a different reason, right? The vegetation is not going to take over, and your HOA is not going to come after you. if you don't do something about it, but you have significant fire risk. And so it just kind of gets back to like land management and land stewardship. And I think if we just think about some of these things, that it's like, hey, look, yeah, it's for a different reason, but it's completely reasonable that I have to go out there and kind of manicure, my property to really reduce, the risk and the fuels profile, and the burn potential that it has. And guess what? That's a beautiful landscape too, right? There's a way we can kind of beautify things in the process of making them more resilient. And so, to your point, you're in between three volcanoes, or, you're sitting on the Florida coast someplace, 100 feet from the shoreline. Yeah, that's maybe just a matter of time, and there's almost nothing you can do to prevent that. And certainly I think we're going to see some of that in large scale divesting from some of these different geographies. But I'm optimistic that I think, they're in the bulk of the cases, we can really do a lot to help not only reduce that risk, but then actually show evidence of it in the data that it has been, statistically defensively, been fortified.
Right. Which sounds like maybe you could even make that data more available to where people could choose where they live because they can research and get that information. Is that the kind of stuff you guys might have and people might be able to get?
It is. Yeah. Uh, we used to work with this gentleman. This is in a past life, but he was a modeler for NOAA, here in Boulder, Colorado. And he asked himself that question, right? He was like, you know what, like it's getting drier in the West. There's more wildfire risk. It's droughtier. There's water concerns, things like that. Like, where's the best place, the most resilient place I could live in the US? And so he put together this mosaic of different models and things he wanted to look at in these kind of post-apocalyptic scenarios, like where's the best place going to be. And he landed on like just outside of Portland, Maine, and bought a little like homestead just outside of Portland, because Portland's really climatically kind of, in the long-term forecast, supposed to be pretty moderate in terms of its changes. It's not as vulnerable to extremes. There's deep ports there, which will allow for, good commerce and getting stuff in and out. It's too far north for major hurricanes, right? So you just kind of had this whole assembly of different information. But yeah, it's something we definitely talk about, is like, at what point is this really going to start to influence, the price of real estate and where people start to settle, versus people just looking at like, man, it's way prettier in between those three volcanoes.
Right. And by the way, you mentioned NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, not the guy with the ark.
That's correct. Yeah. Right.
So people are clear on that.
Yeah.
Toby, if we like look to the future stuff, if you had a magic wand and you could swing it over anything, what would you swing it over to push us for? What gets us further forward? Is it, do you want to defy the laws of physics somewhere, or do we need LLMs to just be smarter? What's the magic to get us to, kind of the future that you're envisioning, that we get there faster, better, whatever?
Yeah, I think the answer, I used to kind of subscribe to this belief that like we have to kind of, get out of this consumerist mindset that's highly extractive and, very one directional when it comes to how we work with the earth and natural resources and things like that. I've since kind of realized that it's going to be very difficult to convince people to live with less, right? And to make these types of lifestyle sacrifices and things like that. So, for that reason, I think in large part, we need to innovate our way out of these problems, right? We're going to need, better technologies that kind of, help support the lifestyles that we've all grown accustomed to, but really reduce those impacts. And I think AI actually is going to help us get there really quickly, which is pretty exciting. I think that, if general intelligence, kind of happens at the rate that they think it's going to, then we're going to be able to really lean into AI to help us solve these problems of like carbon sequestration, and things of that sort that'll give us a better way to help kind of manage our environment and our support system. And one last note on that, Neil deGrasse Tyson actually has a pretty good bit on this, right? Because everybody likes to talk about like, okay, like, well, we're destroying the earth, right? So we better get to Mars. And figure out a way to live on Mars because we're destroying the planet that we live on. And Neil deGrasse Tyson's like, if you think about like the amount of technology and infrastructure that you would need to go terraform Mars and make that a new habitable planet for us to live on, if you just put that same amount or a fraction of that same amount of technology and infrastructure is needed to just make the Earth habitable long term, right? And so it's like, let's stop looking toward the skies to help solve our problem and really focus on, what can be done here to manage what we have. Now, asteroid coming into the Earth, and like that's a whole different scenario, and we probably should have some sort of an exit strategy if we are facing some sort of existential crisis like that. But when it comes to kind of degradation of the planet and its natural resources, we should love the one you have, type of thing.
Good point. And listen, we didn't talk about this. If there's an asteroid coming for Earth, like, can you guys model this for us? Like, do we know? Can you tell me where I should not be building my house for this?
Yeah, that's not our domain, but interestingly enough, I did just see a space twin that looks, because everything we have in orbit right now is looking inward. And NASA, in combination with Lockheed, actually built sort of this combination of looking at like space weather. It plays a big role in Earth systems and things like that. So it might not be us, but somebody can probably tell us that.
That's awesome. That's perfect. Toby, this has been super interesting. I hope people realize how relevant it is to the world we're living in, not just at the global scale. It is at the global scale, but also at the individual scale, and it really matters. So absolutely. I really appreciate the conversation. You guys are doing some really, really interesting stuff, and I think some really important stuff.
Well, I appreciate it, Brian. And thanks for having me on the show. Love what you guys are doing here.
Okay, awesome. Harriet, thanks for joining. What'd you think of the chat with Toby?
I think it was really interesting. It's very complex, right? I don't know for anybody listening, but it had a lot of information in it that had me head scratching a little bit. But I have to say, he had something about like digital twinning and environmental twin. I think he said environmental twin.
Yeah.
And I think it's a subset of digital twin.
Yeah.
And I've heard you mention that word a couple times. Now, I don't know. Do you know? I don't know. I think you need to explain that a little bit. Explain that so I understand what's going on a little bit more, and then I can take in this episode.
Yeah. So digital twin can come in a lot of different flavors. But effectively what we're talking about is fully simulating something from the outside world.
Okay. When you say that, can I give you an example? You can tell me if this is what it is. So if I wanted to create this office of people walking in it, and then I create a subset of that, is that what you're saying? Like,
yeah, but I think if you start with the use case, it makes more sense.
Okay.
So in software, one of the things that's really, really important to do with software is to test it.
Okay.
And so if I write a piece of software that does your taxes, then I should put in fake numbers for taxes. And I should say you made negative money and see if that works. So I want all these different variables to test it.
Yeah.
Nice and easy, makes perfect sense. What happens when I have a robot that drives around in the real world autonomously? It picks where it drives and when it drives. Mm-hmm. How am I going to test that? I can't just say you had a negative income this year and see if it fails. The thing that robot can do is literally infinite. So how am I going to test it?
You have to create an example for it. Is that it?
I'm going to run it around in the real world,
mm-hmm.
and I can't test it in the real world. I think about extreme cases, like I have an autonomous, instead of just a little autonomous robot, I have a giant autonomous dump truck, and it's not okay if it runs people over while it tests because it was broken.
Yeah.
So I create a digital twin of the real world place that giant truck might operate.
Mm-hmm.
And then I run the algorithm for that truck in the digital twin where it can run over grandma. As long as it runs over digital grandma, then we can fix it and make it better.
Oh, okay. So is it like I don't know if you ever like in movies they have simulations of like an army base where people go around, they shoot or they practice or
Yeah,
try. Is it
yeah,
like that?
yeah. That's a really good example.
Okay. Okay. So you're not really in the field, but you're kind of doing like a training to see if you're really in the field.
Yeah, like that's a really great example. Like if you think of like when the military's working on clearing houses,
Yeah.
they don't break into your house to
Right.
try. They
They
set up a
go through
fake
something.
house.
Yeah.
It's almost like a set on stage,
Yeah.
right? So they set this up and then they can run through the things and see what they're getting right or see what they need to improve on. Yes, it's exactly like that. So
I
we,
don't know. I think you mentioned like it was important. Like you mentioned, I think you mentioned why it is important, but can you like go back to that? Like, I kind of want to know why do you guys? Because one, I understand it's so that the robot doesn't run over grandma, but
very important
why?
to grandma.
Yeah, but why was that a thing? Like, I don't
Grandma
know.
got run over by a robot.
No,
That would be bad.
I hated that Christmas movie.
Yeah.
Sorry. Sidetrack. But no, I hope I'm not cutting you off from finishing your thoughts. But like, why did you guys come up with this? Like, why was this a thing that somebody's like, yeah, we need that?
I think really it came from we're pushing more things into the real world. If you think about the whole decade of the Internet of Things, all of a sudden we went from a computer was a guy sitting in front of a screen typing things. And then eventually the computer went on the internet. But it wasn't really the computer on the internet. It was the computer was a tool that allowed the person on the internet. And people were on the internet. Then we progressed to there was no person. There was a sensor that I put on the internet. Or there was my Amazon Alexa or my Google Home or my Apple HomeKit or these kinds of things that were on the internet. Or now my refrigerator's on the internet.
Yeah.
Who knows why? So we have these things, and my refrigerator isn't me. I'm at work, I'm asleep, but my refrigerator is reporting things on the internet. Or I have a humidity sensor at home that tracks the humidity in various parts of my home, right? So that transmits to the internet. Those things are on the internet. We think of them at home a lot because we use them there, but imagine farms. There's a company that I ran into recently, and they're doing things for maple syrup harvesting. And so they're putting detectors to see if the tree's working right, if the collector of the maple syrup's working right, all this kind of thing. And they put those on the internet. So now all of a sudden we have like trees. How do we test that? Okay, well, we can fake the tree part and we can just say, the inputs are coming in so that we're reading that the tree is getting the right, the syrup is moving up every day or something. And then we could have another one we fake out and we say the syrup's not moving up and we make sure the system goes, hey, this syrup isn't moving up.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so that we can that's a real simple kind of simulation.
Yeah.
All I have to do is say syrup moves or syrup doesn't move. But then when we get into things like I'm going to have an autonomous system mow grass under power lines. Like it could run into trees. It could run into stumps. It could be mowing and hit a stump. What happens now? Does it break the blade? How do I test that? I don't just say mowing, not mowing. I have to test all kinds of things about that mower. Where does it go? Where does the autonomous system take it? And if I do, and then a non-robotic case might be if we're doing buildings. So there's a lot of digital twinning happening with buildings. And so they're replicating the systems in the building and replicating things like maybe the way heat moves. And so
in the building?
In the building. And so if we say, here's my air conditioning system and I run it this way and this is all the things it does, and then I simulate the airflow through the building and I detect hot spots in the digital twin, I could do that before I've even built the building. I just do that from blueprints of the building. I erect this 3D just simulation of the building. Now, I don't have to simulate the people walking around in the building necessarily. I could, because people output heat.
Mm-hmm.
Each person is 400 to 500 BTU. So maybe I do need to simulate the people in the rooms and how hot the room gets if I put a bunch of people in a conference room. But I can now simulate those kinds of things, which are kind of the next level of simulation. And then we just keep going to robot in a warehouse that's moving autonomously, or many robots in a warehouse. And how do they interact with each other? Do we get that interaction right? To now, what happens in the physical world? Will we have a landslide? Or if I have a robot outside, like I said, mowing grass or something. And so I think that's where it gets to kind of the next step of that evolution of digital twin, to the kind of stuff that Toby is working on.
I thought the digital twin and stuff was more complicated than how you explain it. Like, I've heard you talk about it multiple times, but I thought it was like, maybe it is, and you dumped it down, right? But that is so interesting. Like, now I'm like thinking about it, like, that makes sense why when we go out, you hear a lot of people saying like, oh, like, I want to simulate my robot, and like, I wanted to avoid like why we even need synthetic data. Like, I remember somebody even said that, oh, I want a robot that can like tell this is a wall, right? Like, or don't crash into it, or like not crashing into other robots, right? Like, not having an accident. I never thought about it deeply, because when you think about it, you see them working, so you're not thinking about, oh, the robot doesn't have too much common sense to say, hey, that's another robot, so I should avoid it. So do they like simulate that so they know stuff like that, or maybe that's not in this context?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Oh.
And I think you're not wrong about the simplicity or the complexity. It's really simple in concept what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It really is just simulate all aspects that you can of the physical world
Okay.
in the computer, right? A
Okay.
digital simulation of it. Where the complexity comes in is how you simulate that and how deep you simulate that.
What do you mean?
In other words, are we going to simulate molecules and atoms? And are we going to simulate protons and neutrons and electrons? And
Wait, how would you simulate that? Like, that's a head scratch for me. I
I,
mean, you don't have to probably even go into it, but like, that's possible?
it's possible.
Okay.
It's just the compute required to simulate something at that level is insanity.
Okay.
But things that we do simulate that are really hard are things like fluid dynamics. Simulate a ship on an ocean, and you have to have the wake behind it. That would really come from a ship. And if you had, let's say that ship was towing something, that thing behind the ship is going to have this kind of bob to it, right? As the waves come by. And really, there are ocean waves, there are higher and smaller ocean waves. They're sort of what you don't necessarily realize when you look at the ocean is there are these big waves, but then there are tiny waves inside of them that move faster and smaller. And then there's the wake of the ship. All those things are happening. They're all, you can calculate them from physics. We know about fluid dynamics, but calculating them for the entire ocean is crazy. So lots of things, in fact, when we simulate them, we will cheat on the physics. In fact, everything we cheat on the physics, in the sense that we aren't modeling gluons and quarks and leptons and Higgs boson particles. And
I don't know what none of those are.
that's all right. But we're not trying to simulate at that level, because we can test our robot or we can test our boat without that level of accuracy. But the level of accuracy is really important to it. I better get the waves right, and I better get that thing would actually weave and bob so much it would get disconnected from the boat. I want to know that.
Yeah.
And so our simulation tools are getting better and better. If you think about video game technology, and you drive a Jeep through the mud and it sprays mud everywhere, like it'll really do that. But with that Jeep, with those tires, get stuck in the depth of that mud, or would it get out of them? We're approximating that. And so there are weird things that happen in these dynamics. Like, you can imagine how much air is in the tire. the air pressure of the tire.
Mm-hmm.
If there's less air pressure in the tire, that tire will flex more around a tree.
Oh my God, there's so much.
Oh yeah.
There's so much thinking to this. Like, I didn't even think about that part. I was like, I just thought tire under. What if it gets stuck into? But I never thought, oh, you need to have so much different variations of it.
Yeah, you can go really deep down the rabbit hole of how realistic you get. And the reality is, see what
Go
I
ahead.
did there? The
Because
reality.
it's fake.
Yeah,
Why are you like this?
it's how I am, Harriet. It's how they made me and my twin.
Okay. I'm
So
silent now.
what we're trying to do is get better and better at those things so that we can do more, like we talk about, open world simulations, and then to the level that Toby's talking about, where they're actually kind of simulating Earth.
Yeah.
So
I think this is opening up a lot about what he was talking. Like, now I'm like, okay, this is making some sense. Because at first I wasn't getting. I was like, huh? I thought this. I don't know what I thought. I don't. I think I thought of it as like a physical thing, like a human twin. I don't know what I thought, but now it's making so much sense. So like, to be able to be detecting like fire, you're not gonna set something on fire. I'm sure. Like, they're probably doing on the back end to see how it probably will work, right?
that's right. And there's lots of things that to get the digital twin right, you'll test in the real world and
Yeah.
make sure. In fact, there's scenarios where we might have a robot perform an action and we'll have a simulation perform the action. Then we'll compare, did I get the same outcome?
Oh, why would you need to know that?
Well, because my digital twin is never perfect. So how
Oh,
good is it? And I can measure how good that digital twin is if I compare it to the same thing happening in the real world.
okay.
Sometimes we'll create a digital twin. Maybe it's not really a twin. Maybe it's a brand new simulation.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm not simulating this exact place on Earth.
Mhm.
And so I'm creating a terrain.
Mhm.
Other times I do want to create this terrain in this specific place or this exact warehouse that I would like to digital twin. But often we're sort of expanding that digital twin to really be a simulation that maybe doesn't exist in the real world,
Mhm.
but we're trying to make it as accurate as possible, and we can make it more and more accurate. And if you think about it from a use case again, the company that's making the AMR, the autonomous mobile robot,
Mhm.
they don't really want to recreate the universe. They just want to make a good robot.
Yeah.
And so company like Toby's or other folks that are building digital twins, they focus on the other side, building a digital Earth or building a digital twin of some kind that then many companies can use for their testing, things that need to operate
Oh.
in that warehouse or in that Earth or what it might be. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you learned something.